Thank you, Javier. It's great to be back in Modesto, and always a joy. I'm glad to see that so many of you changed your minds about Memorial Weekend plans just to be here, and I'm sure you did that for me coming. Yeah. Really nice to be here. I was here 41 days ago, and this is part 2 of that message. Can anybody remember what I said 41 days ago? No. Thank you, Pastor Seth, for the invite, and let's see where this goes. As I fight a cough, I have a 23-month-old baby called Eiley, and she gives me cuddles and love and kisses and snot. So the last 3 nights I've been lying on the sofa because I've been kicked out of the bedroom because of my cough. I should have provided umbrellas for the front row. Or you should have just been here earlier and sat further back. I mean, you know. But if I cough, I will try to always cover it, okay? And actually, when I do get excited when I speak, I spit. I can hit the third row for that, but I'm not going to get excited today because it makes me cough. So I'm kind of going to be mellow today, okay? Be like a Presbyterian. You know, so this is a really, although it's called well, the tradition of this church is Baptist, okay? So we baptize by immersion. So I often say to my Presbyterian friends, you know, you baptize your way, and we'll baptize his way. It gets him a little bit annoyed at me, okay? But I got my water, not much left of it, so hopefully, excuse me, guys. Start, okay? A few years ago, a man by the name of Ernest Kurtz wrote what has become the definitive history of the AA movement, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he called his book, Not God. And you can go on to Amazon and buy that book, okay? And he said, the fundamental problem that alcoholics have is that away down deep, they refuse to acknowledge limitations, weakness, being finite and fallen. And they tend to live under the delusion that they're in control of everything when in reality they can't even control themselves. And so he writes, fundamental to the recovery process is that healing and sanity begin with a single truth realization: I am not God. Hence the title of his book. Of course, this delusion is not the sole possessions of people who go to AA meetings. You know what was behind the very first sin? The serpent says to the woman in the Garden of Eden, when you eat this fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. It's the first temptation. To master your own universe. So you don't have to bend the knee to anyone. You don't have to submit to someone else's rule. You can get away with flouting the moral laws of the universe. You can be like God. And people have been falling for that for a very long time. So Alcohol Anonymous meetings start with each recovering addict reminding themselves of the reality of who they are. And they start by normally saying, hello, my name is Gilbert. And they'll say which addiction they have. And that one introductory sentence enables all who say it to touch base again with sanity. So I thought it would start the same way today. Let's recover spiritual sanity. Get clear on who you are and who you are not. So here's what I'd like you to do, and this is participation, okay? Turn to the person next to you and find out their name. And then say their name instead of yours, and you'll say these words: your name is, and you are not God. Huh? Anybody doing it? You don't need to argue about it, okay? It's quite simple, okay? Your name is Luke, and you are not God, okay? It's amazing. It's amazing how confused we get over this single principle. Anne Lamont, who's written some books about her spiritual journey, she once wrote, the biggest difference between you and God is God doesn't think he's you. No. But here's also the reality. So many of us live in worlds where significant people who are involved in the stories of our lives are living with this little God delusion. And sometimes so do you, and sometimes so do I. So, 41 days ago when I was here, I preached from the Old Testament story about Daniel. And I want to go back to that story. Daniel was a prophet from the Jewish people who was taken from Judea and taken into exile in Babylon, prisoner in Babylon. And Babylon was where he lived, and most of the story is written in Babylon. And for Daniel, Babylon was a second choice venue. He didn't think he would live his life out in Babylon. It was second choice. He didn't want to live there. And Babylon was ruled by a king called Nebuchadnezzar, King Neb. And what we're going to do for a few minutes today is compare Nebuchadnezzar and how he lived to Daniel and how he lived. And so Lizzie read for us Daniel chapter 2. And I want to go back to Daniel chapter 2 if you have a Bible. And Lizzie read a little bit further down in the book. In chapter 2, it starts with these words. Let me read to you a few verses. One night, during the second year of his reign, so he wasn't long into this, King Nebuchadnezzar had such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. He called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers. So within his religion, they were the religious leaders, the astrologers, the musicians, the magicians, the enchanters. And he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. As they stood before the king, he said, I have had a dream that deeply disturbs me, and I must know what it means. So the astrologers answered, long live the king. Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. But the king said to his astrologers, I'm serious. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. It's kind of serious here. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means. Here's what being a Nebuchadnezzar looks like. I've got my day planned, my tasks to accomplish. But my friend's gone through a crisis and has reached out to me and asked for help. And while I go and give help, don't tell me that the thought wasn't there. Dang it now. I didn't get things done the way I wanted to get them done. Or someone is late for an appointment with you. Maybe it's a friend or maybe it's a work thing. And maybe there's a legitimate reason why they're late. But boy, do you feel annoyed that it hasn't worked out the way that you had arranged it to be? Or, in my world, you go home on Friday with plans for Saturday, normally involving watching English Premier League soccer, to hear my wife announce that instead of doing your plans, you're going to Target with me in the morning. And I dig my heels in, and I refuse to go. That's Friday night. But on Saturday, as I'm driving the car to her beloved Target, I realize that I may live with the delusion that I'm God and the world revolves around me, but it isn't a delusion for my wife. She is God. But look at chapter 2 of Daniel. It's only the second year in his reign, but this king of the most powerful empire in the world, I mean, this was unparalleled wealth and power. He couldn't sleep. People who live under this I am God delusion are always only one bad dream, one bad night's sleep away from utter insecurity. And you watch carefully. People who live and act like I am God will go power crazy when their ability to determine their outcomes or when their will is threatened or even if their authority is questioned. And you see it in politicians, you see it in husbands who want to have power over their wives, you see it in parents who tyrannize their children, you see it in bosses who just enjoy bossing their employees, even world leaders who would be willing to push the wrong button if their power was ever threatened. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, he argues that this hunger for power is the essence of our humanity. The will to power is the basic human drive, to be all you want to be without restraints from anyone. And so Nietzsche rejected the notion of any God because he could not tolerate the thought of anyone more powerful than himself. And if there were gods, he said, we would have to slay them all out of jealousy. And what's fascinating about Nietzsche is he declared that Christianity should be abolished because it asks people to surrender to God, to reject attempts to exercise power over others. In fact, Nietzsche understood more clearly than most Christians that there is something about craving power that cannot be reconciled with being a follower of Jesus Christ. He may have his philosophy wrong, but he did understand what Christianity is about. Now, you, like Daniel, are followers of God. You've surrendered your life to Him. And you're trying to live life in a dog-eat-dog, power-exuding world. And there's a great story. Lyndon Johnson was your 36th president. And at the start of a cabinet meeting, he asks his press secretary, Bill Moyers, who was also a Baptist pastor, if he would pray. And so Mr. Moyers does so, but quietly. And President Johnson interrupts his prayer and says, "Speak up, Moyers, I can't hear you." And Mr. Moyers replies, "I wasn't talking to you, sir." Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be all he could be without restraints. And he was a mess, one bad dream away from complete insecurity. And that one dream caused him to view his spiritual advisors with suspicion. They were out to get him, to trick him. And so he acts with immense immaturity. He has this amazing, stupid request. They must not only interpret the dream, they must also tell him what the dream was. If not, off with their head. And he storms out of his cabinet meeting in a huff, back to his room where his concubines and snakes can suck up to him. So you've got this picture of this kind of guy. You might not call him Nebuchadnezzar. You might call him your boss, or your neighbor, or that family member, or your husband. And then there's Daniel. And Daniel lived a countercultural life. Because you see, in the world that Daniel was living, it wasn't just people like Nebuchadnezzar who lived out this God delusion. There were lots of other many people around Nebuchadnezzar who equally had a God delusion. Like check out the behavior of Arioch. In chapter 2, verse 24, Daniel goes to Arioch, who's one of the Nebuchadnezzar's employees, and says, "Don't kill the wise men. Take me to the king, and I will tell him the meaning of his dream." So Arioch quickly took Daniel to the king and said, "I have found one of the captives from Judah who will tell the king, 'Look at me. I'm your man, Nebuchadnezzar. I want you to know I'm on your team." And who else would have thought of going to the exiled Judeans? But I went, and I found this guy. And he didn't find the guy. Daniel came to him and said, "Take me to..." You ever find people like that? In your second choice world, you will find middlemen just like Arioch. and they'll push their way, and they'll spin their lies and their falsehoods to get ahead of you. And they don't operate to the same values or ethics that you operate to. They'll do whatever they need to get promotion, to promote themselves, to promote their interests. And it could be a work colleague, it could be a parent in your kids' club, it could even be a friend in your circle of friends. Arioch kind of people try to get on in Babylon operating to the Babylon values, but not Daniel. If you read verse 27, it says of Daniel, Daniel takes no credit. Daniel says, I can't explain how I can understand this mystery, but God can. And he says, we will interpret, not just himself. He's got his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The way that it was read by Lizzie was in their Aramaic names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In the Jewish language, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And at Daniel's request, the king appoints those three friends of his administrators over the province of Babylon. Daniel introduces to the God-deluded king and his little wannabe band of kings around him a different way to live. And it's not now self-boasting and self-promoting, but it's humble. Daniel knew what Jesus would later say, the meek shall inherit the earth. Anyone ever said to you, hey, I like your meekness? It's cool. And you sit there and you say, Gilbert, if I was to live like that, like a meek way, like a Daniel way, I'd be stood all over. I'd never get on in the workplace. I'd be passed over every time there's a promotion. Can you imagine doing life being free of the junk of having to get the credit? Can you imagine being free of having to be like an image setter? Or the need to self-promote or to be seen, to be recognized, to be praised? There is incredible beauty in humility. It's freedom. I think in my own life, I think of a guy called Tony Campolo. You maybe don't know that name. He passed away just 2 years ago. But you go back many years ago, he took me under his wing as a long-lost second cousin. Like, his wife and my mother were 12 cousins removed, you know? And he was in America and I was in Scotland, and he took me under his wing. And I did not know. He arranged for me to come to America. I did not know that he was a professor of sociology at Penn State, held a chair. If you go down to Philadelphia, there's the Campolo School of Sociology. I did not know he was such a big wig in the world of sociology. And even more, I did not know that he led weekly Bible studies with the President of America in the White House. I didn't know that. And yet he finds me in Scotland and he says, hey, let me help you. I didn't. So Daniel begins to tell Nebuchadnezzar the dream that worried him. Remember chapter 2, verse 1, he wakes up in a cold sweat about a dream. And so in chapter 2, Daniel interprets the dream and he gives him the credit. So read verses 31, and in your vision, Daniel says to the king, you saw standing before you a huge shining statue of a man. It was a frightening sight. The head of the statue was made of gold. Its chest was made of silver. Its belly was made of bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet were a combination of iron and clay. And as you watched, so there's the dream. You got this head of gold. As you watched, a rock was cut from a mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the feet of the iron and clay, smashing them to bits. Then the whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron and clay and bronze and silver. And then the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on a threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. That was the dream. So, You see the picture, okay? I mean, here's his head of pure gold, his chest of silver, his belly and thighs are made of bronze. You can see differing values. You can begin to think it through. Now remember, it's a picture. And the primary way that people in the ancient Near East thought was in picture. And it's a pretty impressive statue with distinctive differences. And now, verse 37, Daniel begins to interpret this statue, this picture, this image. And verse 37, he says, Your Majesty, you are the greatest of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty and power and strength and honor. He's made you be the ruler over all the inhabited world and put even the wild animals under your control. You are the head of gold. The two most visible and status-oozing parts of the statue. The head, much better than, I'd rather be a head than a toe, wouldn't you? And made of gold, better than like silver or clay. And you wonder if Daniel is turning out to be one of those sucking up kind of guys after all. And he's just flattering this God-delusioned king called Nebuchadnezzar. And you keep wondering this when you read verse 39. Because Daniel begins to interpret the dream and share that the other parts made of different compositions represent other kingdoms, but they're inferior to Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. And there's going to be 3 more kingdoms to come, but they're not equal to the stature of the first king of Babylon. But as you listen to the dream, you discover that it's not just a vision of a statue, but the dream has a plot. Because something else entered the dream. We read that, verse 34. And here's this vision, here's this statue made of differing metals. And as you watch, a rock was cut out from a mountain, but not with human hands. And it struck the feet of the statue, smashing them to bits. And then the whole statue is crushed into small pieces, and then they're just blown away by a wind. And the only thing that remains is this great rock that now becomes a mountain. Now remember, picture. We're Westerners, okay? We're children of the Enlightenment. We love to turn it into a formula, to depicturize it, to work out all the bits and what each part represents. So is this the Babylonian Empire, and then there's a Medo-Persian Empire, and then the Greek Empire, and then the Roman? But that's not how the Hebrew mind worked. If you're going to be a diligent Bible student, remember the golden rule. What did it mean for the original hearers? And if the meaning you come away with has no meaning to them, then you've probably got it wrong. So Hebrew readers didn't formalize it or try to pull it apart and figure out what each component was. They saw a picture, and they kept the picture as a whole. And so they see this imposing statue being crushed and destroyed by this rock that appeared, but not by human hands. And one thought begins to rise in their heads. If this rock was hewn not by human hands, then it must be by divine hands. And this dream, this vision is communicating something amazingly grand, that God, the divine hand, will not let wannabe God-deluded rulers in the end win. They didn't see the history of the world being foretold by Nebuchadnezzar through Daniel. The text doesn't say that. They didn't see a revelation of the history of the world. They saw a revelation of the God of history. And to 4 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, to exiled Judeans taken by force from their homeland, here was an incredible revelation. The true God will act. And He's not going to allow Babylon, nor any worldly empire, any king, any despot, any ruler, any I'm a God freak. He will come. And He will establish His kingdom on earth. It was second choice to end up in Babylon, but that's not the end of the story. So will it ever come to pass? Well, Daniel didn't live to see it. Centuries after, the people of God still did not see it. Babylon did fall, But then the Medes and the Persians came and they ruled for 200 years, and then they fell, and then the Greeks under Alexander the Great came, and then he fell, and then the Romans came and dominated. But then one day, to an obscure carpenter and his fiancée, the carving not by human hands, but by divine hands, a child was born, not of earthly descent, not of human origins, not of the will of man, but born of God, carved out from a divine source of divine origins, the kingdom of God breaking into human history, the king of that kingdom appearing. Daniel chapter 2 is not only a glimpse into the fact that God controls, but Daniel chapter 2 is a prophetic portrayal of Jesus. So you have verse 46 and 47. Then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him, and he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, "Truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret." And you sit back and you watch the most powerful man, the leader of the world's superpower, bow and fall prostrate before an exiled God of heaven, fearing Jew. The king bows down to Daniel and Daniel's God. And at that point, if you're Daniel, chilling excitement must have flowed through your veins and the veins of his friends as they watched this superpower emperor bow down before their God. And then we come to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, it starts with an incredible scene, because it seems that Nebuchadnezzar has forgotten all that happened in chapter 2. And you see in Nebuchadnezzar what can often be a response. You have this religious experience, but in the fresh light of day, it's really nothing but fluff. And there's been no heart change. And in the end, authentic faith in Christ always displays itself in heart change. And answer this one, prayer, God, and... But we never do the and. Give me this one thing, God, and I'll do whatever you ask. Is really a manipulation of God. Egotism dressed up in spirituality. And so check out what Nebuchadnezzar does. Chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and he set it up in the plains of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messengers to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial to come to the dedication of the statue set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and languages and nations, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and other music, bow down to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue, and anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Now, you might say, what an arrogant despot. Build a statue, most likely of himself, and if people bow down to him, worshipping it. Yet, as Emil Durkheim, the founder of sociology, suggests, is that not what most of us have done? Not just a certain president at his golf course? Most of us have recreated God in our image. All the features of us that we find appealing, we clothe God with. So in essence, when we worship God, we're worshiping just a mirror reflection of ourselves and what we value. Our views, our opinions, the things that we see as important. His desire, Nebuchadnezzar's, was to safeguard his kingdom. All dictators do that. Shore up any threat that comes from The multi-ethnic mix, the society of captured people that is ruling over. Verse 7 of chapter 3 talks about, this is people from every nation and every language are all there under his rule. Perhaps the first truly multicultural country. And what these diverse people need is unity, something to hold them together and hold my kingdom together so that it's not vulnerable and split apart. And the best way for this to happen is to tap into the spiritual and make what you stand for something to be worshipped, not just obeyed. Make it a God thing, not just a man thing. Religious nationalism is not new. And Nebuchadnezzar's tactic was political genius. Tap the spiritual to gain the political. Again, a tactic not restricted to Nebuchadnezzar and not restricted to 600 years before Christ. Revelation, the book of Revelation, speaks of two figures who will seduce God's people and stand on Satan's side. The first is the Antichrist, the second is the false prophet. One is religious and one is political. Combine them both together. And any king or ruler or president that taps the spiritual to gain the political is more using God for political gain than being about spiritual advancement. In some ways, it's the saddest form of syncretism. So there's a challenge that every Christ follower faces every day. The question we have to ask is, who's on the throne of our lives? And the threat isn't always that we've knocked God off. But the danger is that we've brought somebody alongside God. God and is syncretism. And it will destroy your soul. So look at chapter 3, verse 8. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harps, the pipes. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you had put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you. They refuse to serve your gods, and they do not worship the gold statue you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, and he ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. And when they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my God or to worship the gold statue I've set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I've made. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then, what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Here are the three closest friends of Daniel: Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They'd just been given, chapter 2, significant promotion by Nebuchadnezzar, appointed senior administrators in Babylon. Their future was looking good, real good. They'd be able to give their kids all the kids wanted. They'd be able to fly back to see the in-laws in Jerusalem anytime they wanted to, courtesy of Babylonian Airlines. And now they find themselves standing before an irate employer, being asked to do one simple thing. Like just go to the statue and bow down once. What harm? Like, even do it at night when nobody's looking. Yeah, we bow down to it. But this means they have to cross the line that they drew back in chapter 1, 41 days ago, if you can remember that preach. And that line still stood. Two quick things. If you're trying to live in Babylon without drawing a clear line, you'll live a life of compromise until one day you wake up and you discover that you've compromised a little bit every time, and you compromised your faith and your belief into extinction. That you are no different than your neighbor, even though you say you're a Christian. Second point, if you do draw the line, make sure it sticks, or you haven't drawn the line. So watch what the king says. If you don't bow down, I'll throw you immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? So look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reply, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. The God we serve is able. It's the motto of courageous Christ followers. We live believing that our God is able. I look back at my own life. He's able. And there are people, many people in this room today, married couples and single moms and addicts and broken people and stubborn people and people who were hate-filled and in many ways through differing circumstances, they could come up here to a microphone and give testimony that God is able. Able to heal them and to help them and to preserve them and to provide for them and to give them hope and to take them away from the past life to a new life. God is able. But bold Christ followers don't just believe this. They go further. Look at verse 18. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, we will never serve your God or worship the gold statue that you've set up. Someone described this statement as possibly one of the greatest statements of devotion any human being has ever uttered. Even if he doesn't. Could I say that? Because here's the reality that then happens in chapter 3. God doesn't. The 6th hour clicks, and then the 7th hour, and the 8th hour, and the 9th hour, and the 10th hour, and the 11th hour. And surely God's going to intervene on the 11th hour, and close the door of the furnace, for his name's sake, for his glory, but the 11th hour passes, and God hasn't done anything. And they open the door of the furnace, and they're thrown in. And maybe this morning you're at that point. You've always believed that God would, but this time God hasn't. He hasn't intervened, and your marriage sucks. He hasn't intervened, and your health is not improving. He hasn't intervened, and your bills are piling up and you're way behind. He hasn't intervened, and evil is winning and goodness seems to be losing. You always thought, God, it might not be in my timing, but by the 11th hour, you'll do something. But he hasn't. And the 3 men wonder why. But they still refuse to bend the knee. And the furnace door is opened. And now we come to the whole point of the story. The moment that could have been the worst moment of their lives becomes the most important moment of their lives, because it was there that they meet God. Because so often it is that when we say, even if he doesn't, it's when you meet God, because it's at that point that you really have nothing left of yourself. Many of us think that believing in Jesus is furnace avoidance. But somewhere along the line, we've gotten into the thinking that Jesus is going to make our lives a bit easier. And we want our burdens taken off us, and the Bible talks about laying down our burdens, and we want the pain to be gone, and we want the waters to be calm. But the Scriptures, the revelation of God, tell us that to do life with God is to do life in the furnace, not avoiding the furnace. So, Verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar was furious, so much so that his face became distorted with rage, and he commands the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. He orders some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them in. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumps up in amazement and exclaims to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, Your Majesty, we did." "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouts, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th man looks like a god." I imagine God to have a calendar. May 24th, 622 BC. Meet Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. How would he have felt if he turned up but I didn't? How many times have I missed God's appointment because I did everything I could to avoid the furnace? So, I want to ask you to do something quite dangerous. I want you to stop asking Jesus for an easier life. And I know that's easy for me to say. I know that's very hard to say and to do, to believe. But here's something real important to grasp. 90% devotion to God is still 10% short. And it's in that shortness that you miss God. Let's pray. Lord, it's real easy to say, isn't it? It's not about avoiding the furnace, it's about being in the furnace. It's not about 90%, it's about 100%. Even if God doesn't, and it's easy to say the story and to think that we believe it, but it's hard to live this, God. For us all, Lord, faith is a battle. But we take the revelation of Scripture seriously. That here's a picture being painted of God, and where we meet this God is in the struggles and the disappointments. And after the 11th hour, when we thought you would do something and you didn't, it's there that you call us into something deeper and greater. May we have that hunger and thirst, that desire for the fullness of what you can give us in our lives. Faith that looks like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith of the Daniel, a dare to be that is often missing. May it be there. May we pursue it. So come, Lord, and speak to us and lead us to be these kind of believers in this age for your glory. Amen.